My husband Adrian was a pediatric nurse at Briar Hill General for 19 years. He adored his work, until the morning he came home, walked into our bedroom, and began cutting up every trace of it. His scrubs, his NICU certification badge, even a photo of him holding premature triplets he'd helped save. Gone. Shredded. I sat on the floor beside him in silence for 2 hours before he finally spoke. 3 nights ago, Briar Hill's NICU got slammed. 4 sets of premature twins in under 2 hours. That's 8 critically fragile newborns. The unit was built for 12. They already had 10. But the administrator, Mr. Langford, insisted they accept them all. Adrian had protested. We don't have enough ventilators. We can't do this. Langford's answer? Good nurses find solutions. Some babies aren't meant to make it. We bill either way. The first set of twins came in at 26 weeks. Their lungs were barely there. Then the second pair, 24 weeks. Then the third. Then the fourth. Adrian checked again. 8 babies. 6 working ventilators. He begged Langford to approve emergency transfers. Langford laughed. You think I'm turning away fully insured admissions? That's $500,000 in billing. Do your job. So Adrian did the unthinkable. He paired stronger twins with weaker ones, ventilators for 4, and for the others, manual bag breathing. Adrian took baby Piper. She was 24 weeks old, just over a pound. Every squeeze of that bag was her breath. 12 straight hours. No breaks. No food. No rest. Just squeeze, release, release. Another nurse, Janet, handled baby Josh. Same setup. She had 30 years of NICU experience, but even she was faltering by hour 10. Adrian called out reminders to keep her rhythm steady. Their hands were keeping these kids alive. Then came shift change. The incoming nurse assigned to Piper was new. Only 2 months in NICU. Barely trained for emergencies. Adrian tried to coach her through the process while still bagging. Steady. Not too fast. Gentle pressure. He handed Piper off. 3 minutes later, alarms went off. The new nurse had panicked, squeezed too fast. Piper's oxygen levels crashed. Her heart rate followed. Adrian rushed back, tried to stabilize her. But it was too late. Piper died at 7:23 a.m., 12 hours old. 1 pound, 3 ounces. Later, Adrian passed Langford's office. He was on the phone, laughing. 8 more preemies last night. $500,000 in billing. Our numbers are through the roof. He looked up, saw Adrian, and gave him a thumbs up. That same evening, Langford sent an email to staff. Outstanding work managing overflow. The board is thrilled. Expect more transfers. Adrian vomited in the staff restroom. Then he showed me something. 3 weeks earlier, he'd started recording every conversation with Langford. Just in case, he said. On one clip, Langford chuckled. Not every baby's meant to survive. We bill either way. On another, why buy extra ventilators that sit and used half the time? That night, I stayed up organizing it all. Recordings, emails, admissions logs showing overcapacity. The next morning, I waited in the hospital parking garage. When Langford stepped out of his car, I was there. I think you should hear something, I said, holding up my phone. Audio files queued, thumb hovering over send. His smirk disappeared. His eyes darted. And then, Langford, Briar Hill's revered administrator with 2 decades of experience, stood across from me in that concrete parking garage, smug and confident. Until I hit play on the first recording. His voice poured from my phone. Some babies aren't meant to make it. We just bill insurance either way. For a second, his entire posture cracked. He reached for my phone. I yanked it back, my hands trembling but steady enough to open my email draft, already addressed to 32 people. The board, department heads, the regional director. 1 tap, and they'd all hear him say those words. Langford's breath shortened. Sweat appeared along his hairline despite the crisp morning. Then came the threats. He started talking fast, about my husband's future, about how nurses who made waves didn't last long in this field, about how 1 phone call from him could blacklist Adrian from every hospital in the state. I pictured Adrian on our bedroom floor with scissors in hand, cutting through 19 years of his life. The way he choked up while describing Piper's tiny fingers curling in pain. How he dry heaved for hours with nothing left in him. Langford stepped closer, his hand landing on my car door, boxing me in. Through the window, he leaned down and hissed. Your husband made errors. Piper's death was negligence. I've got documentation ready for the board. He wanted to ruin us. My finger hovered over the send button. He saw it and slapped the glass, loud, jarring. Not enough to shatter, but enough to make me flinch. 2 nurses walked by, noticed, and looked away. No one challenged Langford. Then, he smoothed his tie and made an offer. Adrian could transfer to a calmer unit. Better hours. A small raise. All I had to do was delete the recordings. Pretend none of this ever happened. Let him keep running Briar Hill the way he saw fit. But I thought about the babies who'd come next. The ones who'd be wheeled in next week, next month. Too many for too few ventilators. Nurses forced to make impossible choices. More 7:23 a.m. deaths. More mothers asking, did she suffer? Langford checked his absurdly expensive watch. Too many dials, not enough time. Board's voting on NICU expansion today, he said, smiling. The margins are too good to ignore. I started the car. He stepped back or risked getting his foot crushed. His face flushed dark purple. He pointed at me, mouthing something I couldn't hear over the engine. I cracked the window just enough. You have until 5 p.m., I told him. Resign. Or every board member, every state investigator, every insurance company you've defrauded, every family who lost a child under your watch, will hear these recordings. He shouted something about lawyers, about defamation, about destroying us. I drove away. At home, Adrian was at the kitchen table, still in pajamas, scrolling through old group texts from the NICU team. Photos of babies who'd survived, toddlers in graduation gowns from families who still sent updates. His eyes were glassy. I told him what happened, about Langford's threats, about his desperation. Adrian's hands clenched and unclenched, the same motion he'd made for 12 hours, trying to keep Piper alive. Then he asked the question we were both thinking. What if he doesn't step down? We knew the cost. Langford had resources, lawyers, allies, PR teams. If he chose to fight, we could lose everything. But if we stayed quiet, more Piper stories, more preventable deaths, more nurses forced to play God. That morning dragged. Adrian couldn't eat. He reorganized the closet, then reorganized it again. I made copies of the evidence, uploaded backups, prepped media contacts. At 2 p.m. Janet, the veteran NICU nurse who'd bagged baby Josh, called. Her voice was tight. Langford just called a mandatory staff meeting, she said. He's fishing, asking who might have been recording. He's using words like loyalty and consequences. Adrian got dressed. Not in scrubs. Those were in the trash, but in civilian clothes. He looked smaller without his badge, without his NICU pins. Just a man who tried to save a baby and got broken for it. I drove him back to Briar Hill. We parked in the same garage. Langford's car was still there, still in his reserved spot, still planning to win. Adrian squeezed my hand before getting out, his wedding ring catching the light. The same ring he'd worn while manually ventilating Piper. While her heart slowed, while she died, he walked toward the hospital with his shoulders straight. I waited in the car. Phone unlocked. Recordings queued. At 3:47 p.m, a text from Janet buzzed in. He's in his office. 2 board members with him. Doors shut. Voices raised. At 4:15, another from Adrian. Langford just walked past the NICU. No cologne. No swagger. Cardboard box in his hands. Security's with him. The nurses were whispering. No one knew exactly what had happened, but everyone knew. At 4:52 p.m, a message appeared in my inbox. Subject, immediate resignation. The board chairman's email was brief. Langford had stepped down, effective immediately. The board would begin reviewing NICU policies and equipment needs. They thanked me for bringing concerns to their attention. I stayed in the parking garage until Adrian's shift ended. Nurses passed my car. Some nodded. Some offered small smiles. Word traveled fast in hospitals. They knew what we'd risked, what we'd almost lost, what we'd finally forced into the light. Adrian emerged at 7:30 p.m, looking different, lighter. He got in the car and exhaled slowly. Then he told me how the NICU felt without Langford's shadow pressing over every move. Nurses were already drafting wish lists for ventilators, asking the temporary administrator for real input on safe capacity. We drove home past the cemetery where baby Piper was buried, past the church where her parents had held her memorial, past all the landmarks of our city's grief. At home, Adrian reached for my hand. It was steady, no trembling, no phantom bagging motion. That night, he pulled his old nursing textbooks from storage, the ones he hadn't touched in years. He spread them across our kitchen table beside his laptop, looking up recertification courses and refresher trainings. He wanted to be ready, to fight smarter next time. I made him dinner, real food, not crackers and ginger ale. He ate slowly, telling me about grant programs, about the new policies the nurses wanted to propose. It felt like hope, until midnight. The phone rang. Adrian jolted awake, reflexes from too many years on call. He answered, listened, sat in silence on the edge of our bed. Janet had been suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation into care standards on the night baby Piper died. My stomach dropped. 10 minutes later, I received the same notification in my inbox. Adrian had been summoned to appear before a formal hospital review board. Subject, investigation into negligent patient care resulting in infant mortality. They were blaming him. Adrian didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table all night, documenting every moment from that shift. Names, times, every impossible decision he and Janet had made. By sunrise, he had filled 20 pages. His handwriting wobbled, but every breath of that night was captured in ink. The next morning, I drove to Briar Hill. The parking garage felt different, colder. I found Janet in her car in the employee lot, still in the same scrubs. Her face was swollen from crying. She showed me her suspension letter, sterile language that masked its cruelty. She was being scapegoated for following Langford's orders, for trying to keep babies alive without proper tools. The letter cited charting irregularities, as if failing to log every minute while manually ventilating a dying child was a personal failure. I asked her about the emergency staff meeting Adrian had attended. She laughed bitterly. Langford stood up there, she said, talking about how deeply concerned he was about recent events, about how patient safety is his top priority. He said if any nurse felt overwhelmed, they should speak up before mistakes happened. Then he looked directly at Adrian. That same meeting introduced new documentation requirements, triple verification forms, 30 minutes of paperwork per patient. It was unworkable by design, meant to create more technical failures he could use as leverage. Janet showed me her phone, a text thread with other NICU nurses. Every one of them was being questioned, records pulled, performance reviews reopened, years of spotless service now under a microscope. Langford hadn't left. He'd just moved to the shadows. Retaliation disguised as reform. I left Janet and walked into the hospital. The security guard, who'd known our family for years, stopped me. New policy, he said softly. No non-essential visitors in critical care. Through the glass, I could see the NICU, the glow of warmers, the quiet hum of machines. The nurses moved carefully between incubators, but something had changed. They were hunched, glancing nervously toward the administrative wing. Fearful, I took the elevator to the 5th floor. Langford's office loomed at the end, corner windows overlooking the city. His longtime secretary, Mrs. Chun, wasn't there. A younger woman sat at the desk. I didn't recognize her. She looked up, professional smile barely hiding her unease. Mr. Langford is in meetings all day, she said. You'll need to make an appointment through the proper channels. I heard his voice through the closed door. Confident, commanding. On a conference call, he was discussing efficiency improvements, staffing upgrades, comprehensive policy responses to the incident. No mention of missing ventilators. No mention of Piper. No acknowledgement of his orders. The new secretary stood up, inserting herself between me and the door. Her hand hovered over her phone. Please leave, she said, before security is called. I left. Back in the garage, my phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Adrian. 2 from unknown numbers. 1 voicemail. A hospital lawyer wanted to discuss the situation. They were hoping to find a mutually beneficial resolution. Translation, they wanted us quiet. At home, I found Adrian in the backyard, pulling weeds like they were personal enemies. Dirt clung to his hands. The same hands that had fought to keep a baby breathing for 12 hours. His review board hearing was in 3 days. They were trying to destroy him. The garden had been Adrian's pride. Neatly trimmed beds, hand-labeled herbs. A row of tomatoes we never quite harvested on time. But that morning, it became his outlet. He attacked the soil like it owed him something. Dirt flew. Roots tore. He ripped weeds out in furious handfuls, like yanking memories from his brain. He'd gotten a call, too. The nursing board. A formal complaint had been filed. His license was now under review. 19 years of pediatric care. Hundreds of babies saved. And they were questioning whether he was even competent because of one night. One impossible night when Langford put revenue above respirators. We sat on the porch as the sun climbed. Adrian's hands were caked with dirt. He rubbed them over and over, trying to clean them, to scrub away the phantom feel of Piper's chest rising under his palms. Then the mail came. An official letter from the hospital's legal department. Internal investigation. Administrative leave. Effective immediately. No pay. No access to the NICU. No contact with colleagues. Just like that, he was cut off from the only work he'd ever known. Adrian read the letter 3 times. Then, without a word, he got up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a lighter. He set the letter on fire in the trash can, watched it burn down to ash. His face was blank, but his jaw was tight. A single muscle in his cheek kept twitching, over and over. That afternoon, I drove out to Janet's. She lived 2 towns over in a quiet 1-story home, the kind you could afford after 30 years of night shifts. Her car was in the driveway, but she didn't answer the front door. I found her on the back deck, sitting still, staring into nothing. She'd gotten the same letter. Suspended. No pay. Under review. 3 decades of work reduced to a cold, templated paragraph. Janet handed me her phone, 17 missed calls from coworkers. No one dared speak, but they wanted her to know they were there, that they saw what was happening. Then she pulled out her notebooks. Not recordings like Adrian had, but notes, logs, names, dates. Every time Langford had overridden safety limits. Every admission that breached capacity. Every incident swept under a rug. 3 notebooks. Years of it. We sat at her dining table for hours matching her notes with Adrian's audio. The pattern was unmistakable. Admissions spiked ahead of quarterly reports. Protocols were bent, or broken, whenever budgets were tight. Babies weren't patients. They were numbers. Numbers with insurance. Midway through our work, Janet's neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, brought us tea. Her daughter worked pediatric ICU, just 1 floor below NICU. She whispered that the whole hospital was buzzing. Staff were scared. If Langford could take out a veteran nurse like Janet, no one was safe. I left her house with a flash drive full of data and a growing sense of dread. It wasn't just about baby Piper anymore. This was systemic. Adrian was home when I returned, ironing his only good suit. The review board meeting was the next morning. Our lawyer had recommended postponing, but Adrian refused. He was going. Not just for himself, for Piper, for all the others. He pressed his tie with steady hands. I laid out Janet's documentation on the dining table beside him. He read through it silently. With each page, his posture straightened. This wasn't a fluke. It was a campaign. Langford's initials were on every form, every overadmission, every refusal to transfer critical patients. We stayed up until midnight. He typed his testimony while I organized the exhibits. The printer hummed for hours, spitting out pages of evidence. An indictment built from within. It felt strange, having Adrian home during hours he should have been working. He kept checking the clock out of habit. At 3 a.m., I found him at the kitchen window, staring toward Briar Hill's silhouette in the distance. "Do they have enough staff tonight?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer. By morning, he dressed carefully in the same suit he'd worn to our daughter's graduation. The same one he wore when he accepted a hospital award for excellence in care. Now he wore it to defend his name. We drove together in silence. Same parking lot. Same entrance. But this time, he walked in as a suspect, not a nurse. The meeting was in the executive conference room, polished wood panels, leather chairs. The kind of place where budgets were approved and people were quietly terminated. Adrian carried a box of documentation, proof that baby Piper's death wasn't due to negligence. It was due to Langford's greed. I waited in the lobby for 3 hours. Familiar staff passed by. Some offered nods. Some didn't look at me at all. The tension in the hospital was thick. Everyone had heard. Everyone knew careers were being dismantled. Then Robert, the night security guard, sat down beside me, pretending to scroll his phone. He whispered quickly. Langford had hired 2 new efficiency experts. Their reputations were brutal. Cost-cutters. Enforcers. Staffing ratios had worsened. Documentation requirements had doubled. Nurses were burning out, or bailing. Langford may have resigned, but he was still pulling strings from the shadows. Adrian emerged just after noon. His face was unreadable. "They listened," he said. "They took his materials. Asked questions. But their focus was narrow, just on that night. Just on Piper. Just on the seconds between oxygen drop and heart failure. They promised a decision in 5 days." We drove home in silence. Adrian loosened his tie, finally, but the tension never left his shoulders. That evening, the phone rang nonstop. Nurses, colleagues, friends, each call another piece of the puzzle. Stories of Langford's cruelty, his indifference, his obsession with numbers. It was no longer a theory. It was a pattern, and it stretched far beyond us. Adrian sat at the kitchen table, listening quietly as one nurse after another shared stories over the phone. He took notes, but it wasn't just about defending himself anymore. This was bigger than one night, bigger than baby Piper. He was building a case against a system that had treated NICU beds like revenue streams instead of life support. The next morning, another envelope arrived. This one bearing Langford's name on hospital letterhead. It dripped with insincerity, concern for your mental health, years of dedicated service, resources for managing stress. He was laying the groundwork, trying to reframe what happened as burnout, as emotional collapse, a preemptive smear campaign disguised as sympathy. Adrian didn't yell. He simply crumpled the letter and threw it against the wall. It landed behind the trash can, quiet and final. Then, calmly, he picked it up, flattened the pages, and added it to our growing evidence file. Another exhibit in Langford's long trail of manipulation. I spent the day securing every record we had. I made new cloud backups, added copies to safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks, and prepared new email drafts, ready to go to journalists, health regulators, even state attorneys general. Langford had influence, but we had truth. Adrian couldn't sit still. He reorganized the garage, fixed the door hinge that had squeaked for months, scrubbed the already clean car. His body needed movement, his hands needed tasks. The same hands that had kept Piper breathing were now searching for purpose. That night, Janet called. Her voice was unsteady. Someone had been inside her house. Nothing stolen, but drawers were left open. Her computer was still logged in, and her notebooks were moved. A message, a silent warning. We see you. We met the next morning at a coffee shop, neutral ground. She clutched her cup like it might anchor her. Hands that had once been confident in the NICU now trembled. Janet had found a lawyer, a whistleblower specialist, but the retainer was out of reach. We shared what we had, recordings, documents, patterns. Together, we had enough to expose Langford. He's playing chess, she whispered, while we're trying to save lives. He sent fake concern letters while he infiltrated homes. He threatened livelihoods while he smiled in board meetings. This wasn't incompetence. It was murder by spreadsheet. Piper hadn't died from negligence. She died from a calculated administrative decision. Janet's lawyer advised, document everything. Assume escalation. Langford wouldn't surrender quietly. He'd use every resource to bury us. And we were just a nurse, his wife, and a few terrified colleagues. He was a hospital executive with a decades-long web of favors and secrets. For 3 hours, we strategized. Who else might speak up? What protection we could offer? How to stay one step ahead? The coffee shop emptied around us. The world kept spinning. But we were planning how to fight a man who thought dead babies were just a billing code. When I got home, Janet's notebook sat in the passenger seat. Adrian was outside washing his car again, scrubbing a spotless windshield with laser focus. Every motion precise, the same rhythm he'd once used to keep Piper alive. Then the review board's preliminary findings arrived. 17 documentation errors from that night. Incomplete charts. Missing timestamps. No acknowledgement that Adrian had been hand-breathing for 12 hours straight. No context for the chaos Langford created. Every missed checkbox was treated as malpractice. Adrian read the letter once. Then again. His expression didn't change, but his hands clenched until his knuckles went white. 19 years of spotless records, and now this. His reward for saving lives was bureaucratic execution. He folded the letter and placed it in the evidence box. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. 3 NICU nurses stood on our porch. They'd taken personal days just to come. They brought a folder, copies of their own shift notes from that night. Photographs of the overcrowded unit. Written statements confirming what Langford had done. Sarah, who had worked alongside Adrian for 15 years, handed him her resignation letter. She couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep working in a place that buried its babies for bonuses. 2 more had already resigned. Others were planning to follow. The NICU was hemorrhaging talent. We reviewed every page of their evidence. It was damning, but it came at a price. These nurses were risking their licenses, their homes, their family security. Langford had built a system where speaking up meant losing everything. That evening, Janet showed up at our house again. Her hands shook worse than before. She'd received a letter from the hospital's lawyers. They were suing her for breach of confidentiality. They wanted her documentation destroyed. They wanted her silent. I read the letter twice. Cold legal jargon wrapped around a single truth. This was retaliation. Langford wasn't just fighting to keep his job. He was fighting to erase everyone who had dared question him. We worked through the night. Recordings, notes, photos, statements. We built a timeline, a narrative, a complete, undeniable picture of what Langford had done, systemic abuse disguised as policy. Adrian's hands were steady now. The tremors were gone. He had found purpose again, not inside the NICU, but defending it from the outside. The next day, I returned to Briar Hill. Robert, the night shift security guard, met me in the garage. He handed me a thick envelope and glanced nervously around. Inside were internal memos, budget projections tied to overcrowding, emails openly discussing acceptable loss ratios for preemies. Robert said he wasn't the only one. Other staff, maintenance, supply clerks, even transport drivers, had begun compiling their own evidence. Ventilator repair requests denied. Orders for essential equipment delayed. Langford had bled the NICU dry while padding the bottom line. The rebellion was slow, quiet, but growing. I sat in the car with Robert's documents on my lap, heart pounding. Every page was another nail in Langford's coffin. And I knew, we were almost ready. But even as we gathered more allies, I could feel Langford tightening the noose. New documentation policies that were mathematically impossible to comply with. Vague memos threatening suspension for any nurse who asked too many questions. He was shifting tactics, using bureaucracy as a weapon, burying resistance under paper and fear. Back home, Adrian was on the phone nonstop. Word had spread far beyond Briar Hill. Nurses from other hospitals were calling. Some were crying, others just angry. All of them had stories about administrators like Langford who prioritized billing codes over breathing infants. Langford wasn't unique. He was just the one we'd caught on tape. That night, a knock at our door. It was Dr. Martinez, head of pediatrics, a man who'd been delivering babies for 25 years. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. He sat in our living room like gravity had tripled. His hands trembled as he pulled out his resignation letter. 2 weeks' notice. I can't be part of this anymore, he said. He told us about the board meeting Langford had just led. A new efficiency plan had passed unanimously. Lower nurse-to-baby ratios. Slashed equipment budgets. Maximize turnover. The board saw graphs. Not gasping newborns. Dr. Martinez gave us names. Board members who might still care. Who might still remember that hospitals existed to heal, not profit. The next morning, Janet called early. Her voice was different. Steady. Decisive. She'd made her choice. She was going to the state nursing board. She was done being afraid. We met at her house. Adrian helped her organize 30 years of patient records, charts showing dangerously high ratios, incident reports that had been buried. We made meticulous copies. If they wanted to erase her, she'd leave behind a permanent record. As we worked, Janet told us about the other nurses. The ones who tried to speak up and disappeared, transferred, demoted, blacklisted. Langford had spent 2 decades building an empire of silence. But now, he was facing people who had nothing left to lose. That afternoon, I drove Adrian to meet with Dr. Martinez and 3 other physicians. They gathered in Martinez's home office. No surveillance, no prying ears. Rebels in white coats. Dr. Kim had been tracking infant mortality rates. Quietly, carefully. They had been rising since Langford took over. Not enough to trigger state reviews, but enough to matter. Enough to know babies were dying who didn't have to. They strategized for hours. Which board members might listen? Which state officials had authority? How to shield the nurses who were risking everything. It felt like a revolution in slow motion. The next morning, we got the decision. Adrian's nursing license, suspended pending further review. 19 years. Hundreds of babies saved. Erased by 1 paragraph. Consider counseling, the letter said. Explore alternate career paths. Adrian read it once and placed it with the rest of the evidence. He didn't cry, but his hands clenched. The same hands that had kept Piper breathing for 12 straight hours were now deemed unfit by men who'd never held a 1-pound infant fighting for life. That evening, our home became a war room. Janet, Dr. Martinez, Sarah, 5 other nurses, all around our dining table. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos, statements, charts, audio. Langford's fingerprints were on every corner of the rot. Now the question was, how to use it. Dr. Martinez had reached out to someone, Dr. Patricia Chun, a board member, former NICU nurse. She had agreed to meet. Privately, she wanted to see everything. It was our best chance to stop Langford through official channels. We spent the entire night preparing. The presentation had to be perfect, clean, logical, devastating. Adrian's recordings would be the heart of it. Janet's documentation, the spine. Every piece carefully placed to pierce the armor of bureaucracy. The meeting was set for the next evening at Dr. Chen's home. Away from the hospital, away from the cameras. Just us, and one person who might finally do the right thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Piper's tiny hands, clenching and unclenching in those last minutes. I kept thinking of her parents, and of all the others who'd never know their babies were sacrificed for someone else's quota. The next morning, Langford struck again. A hospital-wide email. New quality assurance policies. Any staff discussing patient care outside official channels would be immediately terminated. Any documentation not stored in the hospital system would be considered theft of proprietary information. He was sealing every door, silencing every voice, burying every truth. Adrian read it, then walked upstairs and laid out his suit. The same one he'd worn to the board review. The suit that now felt like armor. He was dressing for battle. I spent the day making final preparations. Multiple drives. Cloud backups. Packages ready to mail to regulators and journalists. Fail-safes, in case this meeting didn't work. Janet arrived early. She wore her nursing school graduation dress, 30 years old, perfectly pressed. Then Sarah. Then Dr. Martinez. We packed the car with evidence and conviction. On the way to Dr. Chen's house, Adrian sat quietly, hands on the box in his lap, breathing in that same steady rhythm. Inhale, exhale, the rhythm that had once kept Piper alive. I reached for his hand. His ring caught the streetlight, a flash of silver. Dr. Chen lived in a quiet neighborhood, modest and still. The porch light was already on. She opened the door herself. We filed in. Her living room became a courtroom. Her coffee table, our war table. She listened. Calm, attentive, patient. Adrian spoke first. Clear, factual, no embellishments. Just truth. Then he pressed play. Langford's voice filled the room. Some babies aren't meant to make it. We just bill insurance either way. Dr. Chen didn't flinch, but her knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. Janet followed. She opened her notebooks and laid bare the system. Admission spikes before budget reviews. Unsafe ratios hidden in pretty reports. Violations ignored because the babies couldn't testify. Then Dr. Kim. Then Sarah. One by one, they built the case. Dr. Chen didn't interrupt once. When we finished, she sat back and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she said, "I'll call the board." We exhaled, for the first time in what felt like weeks. 3 decades of negligence. A pattern of danger disguised as policy. Profits elevated above patients. Sarah added staffing records. Ratios so impossible, it was a miracle any baby survived. Nurses driven out. Experience lost to burnout and fear. Dr. Martinez followed with mortality statistics. Cold, impersonal numbers that represented warm lives extinguished too soon. Dr. Chun took it all in. Carefully, methodically. She cross-checked dates. Asked sharp questions. Verified every claim. We sat quietly as she flipped page after page, the weight of truth piling on the coffee table. After 2 hours, she closed the final binder and looked at us. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, she'd suspected. The mortality uptick. The rush policies. She had challenged Langford in previous board meetings, but had been silenced by charts of projected revenue and polished phrases like operational efficiency. But now, we'd given her something they couldn't ignore, evidence. She promised to call an emergency board meeting within 48 hours. We left her house quietly, filled with the cautious kind of hope that only comes after months of betrayal. The next day was all preparation. Langford would hear about the meeting. Of course he would, and he'd strike fast. Sure enough, couriered letters arrived that afternoon, cease and desist orders, defamation threats, legal scare tactics mailed to every whistleblower involved. Our lawyer reviewed the letters. Mostly smoke, she said. Truth is still a defense. We didn't back down. As sunset approached, we gathered again. Adrian wore his suit, the same one he'd worn when fighting to save his license. I helped him with his tie, each knot tighter than the last. There was no trembling this time. His hands were steady. The same hands that had kept Piper alive for 12 hours were now fighting for the babies who'd never get even that long. We drove to Briar Hill General, the same parking garage where I'd once shown Langford his own voice recording, the same spot where this war began. Dr. Chun texted us from inside. The board was seated. 5 members. Enough for quorum. The meeting lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of truth against bureaucracy. Langford defended himself to the bitter end, denying, deflecting, dismissing. We waited outside in our car, hands clasped tight, surrounded by scattered headlights. Other nurses and staff had come too. Some waited in silence. Some just stared up at the NICU windows. A quiet vigil for justice. At 11:47 p.m. Dr. Chun emerged. Even in the dark, we could see how exhausted she looked. She walked slowly toward us. Our car door opened. She leaned in. Then she smiled. The board voted, she said. Langford is out. Effective immediately. But it wasn't just that. Emergency funding for equipment upgrades, approved. Safe staffing ratios, mandated. Admission protocols, under full review. Everything we'd fought for. Everything Piper had died for. Adrian broke down in the passenger seat. 19 years of composure shattered in one night. He sobbed like I'd never seen him sob. Grief, relief, rage, love, all tangled together. I held him. Outside, the staff members surrounding our car began to cry too. Some clapped. Others just leaned against their own steering wheels, wiping their eyes. We'd won. In the days that followed, it all unraveled fast. Langford's office was emptied out. The legal threats vanished. The state nursing board reinstated Adrian's license after reviewing our files. Janet's suspension was lifted. The defamation threats dissolved. New ventilators were delivered within a week. Real ones. The kind Adrian had begged for. Staffing schedules were rebalanced. No more asking one nurse to care for 5 fragile infants. Dr. Martinez rescinded his resignation. He offered to lead the rebuilding efforts. And the NICU? It started to feel like a NICU again, not a billing machine. Adrian returned to work the following Tuesday. Fresh scrubs. Clean badge. Quiet applause from the staff. He walked back to his station and checked the new equipment, every wire, every alarm. It was all finally enough. That night, he came home on time. No emergency overtime. No impossible choices between life and death. Just a man returning from a shift where every baby had been cared for the way they should be. Over dinner, he told me about his day. For admissions, all properly staffed, all breathing steadily. For the first time in weeks, we slept through the night. That weekend, we visited Piper's grave. Adrian knelt down, placed new flowers on the small headstone. He whispered something only she could hear. Then he stood, taller somehow. Piper had lived for 12 hours. Her tiny hands had clung to life with every ounce of strength. And because of her, the system that failed her would never be the same.